first talk on the Fitzroy Inn was a brief overview of how the inn was established and how it was built. While George and Anne Cutter were involved and really seen as the first settlers of the area, they built this inn for John Foster. The licensee was Anne Cutter, and George was mainly involved in the construction. During that time, George was challenged by a lot of legal things that tied him up for quite a considerable time. One of them was a guy by the name of John Collins, who started a rumour, basically, that George had stolen some cattle. John Collins was a convict who had been given what's called a ticket of leave. A ticket of leave was that they'd served time and they could move on, and in that time he worked with George, and George found reason to dismiss him, and he wasn't happy about that. So he found an opportunity when some cattle went missing to implicate George that he had stolen the cattle. George was charged for that, and it was only by chance that John Collins was in one of the locals' areas chatting and bragging about he had caught George out and brought him down by a lie, that people around him went to the authorities and related that, and through that George was released from the implication that he had stolen the cattle. There were some other instances where a chap supposedly fallen off a horse, and his name was Lupton, and he owned the licensee of the Woolpack Hotel in Bargo. What had happened is his wife contacted George to come and help because he was in grave danger of his life. So George rode over to see where he was. John Lupton was in a bad state, and George, as they say, he bled him, which is the sort of things they did in those days, and he tried to save his life. George felt that there was some impropriety gone on, and there was some circumstances there that warranted for that incident to be investigated, and it took quite a lot for George, who went to see the local sergeant marshal, who wasn't quite interested in coming and looking at the body to see where he thought that he might have been murdered in actual fact. It was a pretty savage place around here in those days. There was a lot of brutality that went on, and it was a harsh place to live in those days, and these guys that established this inn went through quite a lot. At the end of the day, the widow, Anne Lupton, was able to go to the governor and request that an inquest be made, and after that they found that there was not enough evidence to be able to resume the body or whatever, and to look at what might have happened. This was just one of several incidences that George faced during his life here. He was actually, for quite a more serious crime, which we'll cover at a later date, he was sent off to Van Diemen's Land for 15 years. I briefly touched on that on the first discussion we had here, but on his return is when Anne had taken up with another man, and there was some conflict there as well. But these and other things we'll cover in future discussions, and we'll keep this going, and I'm just going to have a nice glass of local Southern Highlands wines, and you come down and join us. There's lots of stories to tell. That's delicious.